שיר המחלות, אסעין אל כגרים, מאין יבוא עזרי. עזרים אדוני, עושה שמיים וארץ. אל ייתן למות רגלך, אל ינום שומרך. הנה לא ינום ולא ישן, שומר ישראל. אדוני שומרך, אדוני צלך, עליית ימינך. יומם כשמש לא יכך, וירח בלילה. אדוני שמורך מכל רע, ישמור את נפשך. אדוני ישמור צאתך ובואך, מעתה ועד העולם.
A reading from Proverbs 31. What a rare find is a valiant woman. Her worth surpasses by far what can be measured in material things. With her husband, she holds a union of trust. They are everything to each other. All the days of their life together, they evoke the best in each other. In all her endeavors, she is like a lighthouse, bringing light and guidance to all who pass by. From first light of day to darkest night, she seeks to supply the needs of her family and community. She conceives an idea and nurtures it, bringing to fruition her dreams. She strengthens herself with joy and vitality. She attacks her task with enthusiasm. Her enthusiasm never ceases. Her force cannot be diminished. Her happiness shines for her children and her friends. A reading from Albert Einstein. Strange is our situation here upon earth. Each of us comes for a short visit, not knowing why, yet sometimes seeming to divine a purpose. From the standpoint of daily life, however, there is one thing that we do know, that we are here for the sake of each other. Above all, for those upon whose smiles and well-being our own happiness depends, and also for the countless unknown souls with whose fate we are connected by a bond of sympathy. Many times a day, I realize how much my outer and inner life is built upon the labors of others, both living and dead, and how earnestly I must exert myself in order to give in return as much as I have received and am still receiving. Who is the person who desires life, who lives and loves each day, always striving to see the good? We have come together today to honor the life and to mourn the loss of Lois Salem. May her memory be for a blessing. Even as we grapple with the pain of her physical absence, we recall the gift of her presence in our lives. We are thankful for all that was good and true in the way that she lived, and for the precious memories that will endure among all those who knew and loved her. Lois Carol Salem was born on May 17, 1947, in that tough borough of New York City known as the Bronx. Her parents, Harry and Sylvia, were both second-generation Americans and New Yorkers whose families had arrived in the United States at the end of the 19th century. When Lois was about 10 years old, she and her parents, along with her older brother Mitch, moved from New York down to Miami Beach as part of the large wave of Eastern Seaboard residents who relocated southward during that period. Lois spent her teenage years in South Florida, going through middle school and high school. And as the fates would have it, not long after she graduated, she attended a hurricane party where she met a young man named Gene Salem, who would soon become her husband and life partner. Gene was also a transplant to Florida, but his family had moved from Chicago at about the same time as Lois's had come from New York. Lois and Gene didn't need very long to figure out that they wanted to spend the rest of their lives together. So after only a few months of dating, they chose a day for their wedding and began their life as a married couple. They were both just shy of 20 years old at the time. As Gene emphasized, though, he was actually 6 months younger than Lois, a fact that would allow him to frequently tease her about robbing the cradle. Apparently, there was some skepticism among many of their friends regarding how long their marriage would last, with some friends betting that they wouldn't stay married more than a month. But those friends did not count on the strength of the love that already existed between them, or that it would continue to grow and deepen over the course of their almost 6 decades together. Just about a year after they were married, they welcomed their first child into the world and into their family, a daughter they named Deanne. It soon became clear to them that it would be more difficult in Florida to provide the kind of life they wanted for their baby daughter, and so they made plans to return to Gene's hometown of Chicago, and were able to move forward with those plans by the time Deanne had turned 1. Challengingly, Chicago, too, turned out not to feel like a good fit for the family, and relatively quickly, they formulated a new plan that involved a move to Cleveland, where Gene had an aunt and uncle he was connected to. But this time, they knew not to put all of their eggs in a single basket, and proactively decided to keep New York and Florida on their list of fallback options, just in case Cleveland also proved to be not quite the right fit. But happily, they never had to activate the second part of that plan, because Cleveland did turn out to be a good match for them, and it has continued to be so ever since. Initially, after their arrival in Cleveland, the family lived in 2 different apartments, but relatively quickly, they found a home to purchase on Parker Drive in Mayfield Heights, a home that Gene and Lois would remain in for the rest of their life together. And it was not too long after they moved into their new home that they welcomed the arrival of their second child, their son, Phil, just a couple of days before their 6th anniversary, in April of 1973. From that point forward, the family would always combine the celebration of these 2 important and festive occasions. Once they had settled in their new home, Gene and Lois agreed that they would divide up the family responsibilities in a fairly traditional way, with Lois being in charge of the domestic arena and Jean being the primary breadwinner. However, this division of roles did not in any way reflect a traditional division of influence or power within the family, as Jean acknowledged when he shared that he learned very quickly the importance of the phrase, "Yes, dear," for things to run smoothly and harmoniously in their home. Jean was committed to supporting his young family financially, and he wasted no time in finding work in their new city. At first, he found a sales position at Glidden Paints, but within a short while, he secured a new and more stable job, also in sales, with Sears Roebuck, a company he worked for nearly 3 decades, until the mid-1990s. For Deanne and Phil, growing up in Mayfield Heights in the 1970s and 80s had many positive dimensions. One of those was the natural and easy connection that many of their friends from the neighborhood felt to their mother. Lois did not reserve her maternal instincts only for her own children, but extended them to all those who became part of her children's lives as well. And those friends in turn considered Lois as a kind of second mother, perhaps most especially when they were offered some of the tasty baked treats that Lois was so good at creating. Baking was only one of the many talents and interests that animated Lois's life. She was also an avid gardener who could successfully grow both flowers and vegetables. But she was always adamant that the flowers she grew had to stay in the ground rather than having their lives cut short in a glass vase on the dining room table. Lois was also passionate about travel. She and Jean were able to take a number of memorable trips together over the years, both within the continental U.S., when they visited many of the majestic national parks out west, such as Yellowstone, Zion, and the Grand Canyon, or going a bit further from home on trips to Alaska and Jamaica. Their most adventurous travel experiences would take them all the way to Israel and even further to Australia and New Zealand. In more recent years, as the age of the internet arrived, Lois became an enthusiastic user of Facebook. She loved sharing what was going on in her life with others and hearing about other lives as well. She also grew quite passionate about sharing her views on various issues of the day. There were even a couple of times, I understand, that the passion of her views was so pronounced that her Facebook account was temporarily suspended. Although Lois would probably not have described herself as religious, she had a very strong Jewish identity. She and Jean were both lifelong supporters of Israel, often making contributions to Israeli organizations such as Magen David Adom, the Israeli equivalent of the Red Cross, or Friends of the Israel Defense Forces. It was also important to her to host festive gatherings on many of the Jewish holidays, such as Hanukkah, Passover, Rosh Hashanah dinner, or a Yom Kippur breakfast. As positive as the first 2 decades in Mayfield Heights was for the Salem family, the decade of the 1990s was an incredibly difficult and painful one for them. In February of 1992, their daughter Deanne, who was by then a recently married young adult with a 6-month-old named Nicholas, developed a complex set of symptoms that resulted in her death on the 29th day of that month. The family never did feel like they received an adequate medical explanation for what had happened to her. Just a couple of years later, Jean was afflicted with a series of illnesses that left him unable to continue working, a change which required a complete shift in the roles that had served him and Lois both so well for so many years. Still grieving for their daughter, Lois, out of her deep love and devotion to her husband, moved into the role of caregiver for Jean as the need arose, As Jean expressed it, she was both his wife and his nurse. She also took on new work responsibilities, finding a job as a merchandiser for American Greetings, a position she would hold for nearly 15 years. One other core attribute of Lois was her tremendous inner strength and her dedication to caring for others. She cared for her children and their friends. She cared for members of her extended family. And she cared for Jean in a sustained and profound way. But she rarely shared with others the worries or the challenges that she was dealing with herself. She did not want her loved ones to carry any of her burdens, even though she would be the first to offer to carry theirs. Just last year, she was diagnosed with breast cancer. But she relied on her strength, her stubbornness, and her ability to fight, to get through the surgery, and then the radiation, and finally the medication that led to the cancer completely disappearing. Lois was a person who was full of life and resilient in the face of suffering, illness, and pain. And having recently beaten back cancer, she appeared to be headed for many more years of remaining an important presence in the lives of her family and friends. But as strong as she was also a vulnerable human being, as we all are, and subject to forces and events that are not within our control. It was under such unpredictable circumstances that she left the world last Shabbat on April 6th, 2 days after Phil's birthday, and on the very day that marked her and Jean's 57th wedding anniversary. As Jean poignantly reflected, we should always strive not to take what is most important in our lives for granted. May the memory and spirit of Lois's strength, her passion for life, her stubbornness, and her devotion always be an inspiration and a blessing. Zichrona livracha. I'd like to invite everyone, if you're comfortable doing so, to rise for the memorial prayer, El Maleh Rachamim. We're going to wait for Gina's going to stand.
El Maleh Rachamim, Shokhaina Bamramim, Hametzemenu Chanechonam, Tachat Kanefei Ashkina, B'mahalot Kadoshim Adhorim, Kezogar Garakim Azhirim, Et Nishmat Liba Chaya Bat Heri Vesilve Shagalach Alev Olama Began Eden Et Gai Menuchata Hanabaval Garachamim Hastirega Besetar Kanafecha Leholamim ותצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתה, אדוני גנחלתה, ותנוח בשלום על משכבה, ונאמר Amen.
I'll read the English translation of that prayer. God, filled with mercy, dwelling in heaven's heights and the depths of our hearts, bring proper rest beneath the wings of your Shekhinah, your indwelling presence, amid the ranks of the holy and the pure, illuminating like the brilliance of the skies the soul of Lois Salem, who has gone to her eternal place of rest. May you, who are the source of mercy, shelter her beneath your wings eternally and bind her soul among the living, that she may rest in peace. And together let us say, Amen. Please be seated. Burial will take place immediately following the conclusion of today's service here at the Beit Olam Cemetery at 25796 Chagrin Boulevard in Beechwood.
Mr. Birch is going to take you to where we're going to bring the casket to you. And John, kind of step up the aisle, please. Elders will step up the aisle. Family members, I'm going to have you get your coats.
Please rise, if you feel comfortable.
These are my folks. Simple.
Family members, I'm going to ask you to follow behind the casket. I'm going to go directly onto our cars. Friends, I'm going to ask you to step directly to your cars, please. Those of you who are driving with us to the cemetery, please remember, turn on your headlights, and with this weather, I'm going to ask you to turn on your four-way flashers as well. If you're not going with us to the cemetery, if your car's on the other side of the building, you may want to exit through the front, otherwise exit through the rear of the chapel.
Is that helping? I think I should. First,